And thank you for tuning in. You know what? I am so excited today. I have this dynamic guy that is on the show. I can already tell you I love his personality, and we're going to have a great conversation as I always do, laid back, no, bars or anything here. We just straight up talking. So let's welcome Lair Torrent. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Carolyn, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Now, I've read over your bio, and I
Hmm.
tell you, you've been through some things. You've
Yeah,
lived in your
yeah.
life, and
The road's been
but
a little longer.
you know what, mine has too. So that's why when I read over your information, I
Hmm.
could attach to it myself
Yeah.
personally, actually.
Hmm. Hmm.
But you pushed through it, so that's why I'm so excited to have you on the show today. Um, let's just go right into it.
Sure.
You were when you streamed right into this world. Your
Hmm.
mother was a young mother at the
Yeah.
time,
15.
and 15, and I can relate to that because I was a young mother as
You
well.
were.
Yeah, and you know, but you did so well from what I can see. It was a poverty environment. Your mother didn't
Hmm.
have very much, I
Hmm.
assume.
No, I like to
So
say it
you,
was like Little House on the Prairie.
oh wow, but you
No,
pushed through it.
yeah, no electricity, no heat, no running water. It was, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
a lot of kids actually go through that, especially in
Hmm.
today's time. Back in the
Hmm.
day when you were a young mother, as I was, it was a taboo kind of thing. People didn't, they frowned on it.
Oh,
Nowadays,
she got thrown out of school
right.
because she was a bad influence on the other girls.
You
Yeah,
understand? You
yeah.
automatically went to a different school, and I did it as well. You
Yeah, she
know,
was. My grandmother went to the school and said to the principal, "So you're taking away the one thing that could possibly save her from this."
exactly.
Yeah.
I was fortunate in the case where, and I'm sorry to deviate a little bit, but I can
No.
relate to your story personally.
Yeah, do it.
I was a young mother. I was actually a little younger than your mom.
Mm.
And I had to go to another school,
Hmm.
but it was still a structured environment, but it was
Hmm.
still away from a normal institute of education, and I
Hmm.
was blessed enough to push through it as well.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
so I agree with you. When you pull children out of an environment, it kind of strickens them a little bit,
Hmm.
So
Sure. Hmm.
that's why when I read your information, I automatically connected to it. But despite all of that, you went on in life to become what I consider very successful. You are a marriage and family therapist, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And you're an author.
Yeah.
Congrats, congrats.
Kid
The
from the
book
back of
is,
the class wrote a book.
hey, that's where the best stories come from, honey. The best and the real stories, because
The
there are a
kids
lot
from
of
high
truth.
school are like, him? That guy? Come on.
Yeah, me. And I bet they're probably all looking and buying your books right now. And the title of your book is The Practice of Love, and I want to talk
Hmm.
about that a little bit, a
Sure.
little later. You're a psychotherapist, an
Hmm.
executive consultant, and a speaker.
Hmm.
How do you manage it all? I try to when I have people on my show, I'm like, I don't want to tell your story. I feel like no
Hmm.
one can tell your story better than you, so
Hmm.
I want to hear it from you.
Hmm.
How do you manage it all?
So I've known you all of about 3 minutes and 58 seconds, and I think you already know the answer to that question because you've done it yourself, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because when you come from that side of the tracks, as I like to say, when you come from that socioeconomic background,
Mm-hmm.
and look, let's also add to the fact that you're also a woman. You're a woman of color. That's
Mm-hmm.
also going to affect you in a way that it did not affect me. That track is going to be
Right.
longer for you than it is for me. So let's just say that up front.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But it's funny because my wife asked me the same thing. She's like, "How do you keep?" She asked me this morning. She's like, "Because I was up until 1 o'clock last night doing things that I need to get done."
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you come from that place, when you come from um, a deficit perspective, when you come
Mm-hmm.
from that side of the socioeconomic divide,
Mm-hmm.
and you want to do everything you can, and often it's that I call it the stray dog mentality. It's if there's food,
Mm-hmm.
you eat,
Mm-hmm.
and you
Mm-hmm.
make hay while the sun's shining, and you work your ass off is what you do.
Yeah.
And so you
Mm-hmm.
know that again that track is going to be a little bit longer than it is for other folks,
Mm-hmm.
folks who were born into money, who had different circumstances. And I'm not going to say that their lives weren't difficult for the reasons they may have been difficult, But our lives, yours and mine, will be difficult because there was just no money, and so the upbringing is quite pragmatic. And the pragmatist in me goes, "Time to work, time to get that done." No one's going to come and save you.
No, not at
Yeah.
all. No
Mm-hmm.
matter how much you pray a lot of times and want it to happen, it just doesn't happen most time. You have to
Mm-hmm.
find your way out of no way, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so, and my mother and I oftentimes say, what's going on with these kids today? A lot of times, even when children are born, they're fortunate. They still seem to make life kind of difficult. And it seems
Mm-hmm.
like, I don't know, we say they're giving too much. Sometimes children are just given too much and it
Yeah,
makes them not appreciate things. Do you agree with that?
I do. And I have someone said to me the other day, "Your kids talk to you all the time and they hug
Mhm,
you,
mhm,
and they're like, how do you do that?" And I go, "They
mhm.
know I'm a person."
Yeah.
And so that pragmatic upbringing that I had, I remember I was 7 or 8 years old when my mother came to me and she said, "I'm your mother. I will
Mhm,
always be your mother, but I am a
mhm,
person first.
mhm,
You are my son. You will always be my son, and I will always love you, but you are a person first, and I will always treat you that way." And
mhm.
so consequently, what I recognized is here was a woman who struggled, and I didn't take on her struggle, but I also recognized that I had a hand in it. I had things that I needed to do, responsibilities that I needed to pick up. Sometimes it may be that were a little before my maturity level.
Right.
Poverty will do that to you.
Mhm,
I learned to cook a meal when I was real young, and I asked my mom what was for dinner. She said, "Guess what? You're going to learn how to cook today." And being not a
mhm,
bright child, I then asked her what I was wearing to school tomorrow, and that was the day I learned to do laundry. Um,
mm. So you
you
need
know,
to just stop asking questions.
I really need you to shut up.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But you know what? It made you stronger.
it did. Well, it made me resourceful. It made me stronger. I think it gave me a skill set that I think others don't. It gave me a bandwidth.
Mhm,
But I also, like to your question about kids these days, it's like I think they look at their kids, or I think they look at their parents like an
mhm,
ATM and a commissary. This is where I get my food
mhm,
and my money.
mhm.
And this new parenting style is like, well, we don't want to put anything on the children. Yes, you
Right.
do. Yes, you
Mhm.
do,
Yeah.
because you're not doing them any favors.
Mhm.
My kids, they've got it easy compared to, they got it real easy compared to their mother and
What?
I. Yeah,
Tell me about it,
yeah,
boy.
yeah. But
Woo.
they're appreciative. They know that their parents are
Right.
people. And so I
Mhm,
think one of the biggest mistakes parents are making these days is that
mhm,
they keep omitting from their children's experience that I'm a person too.
mhm. Now,
Mm-hmm.
just to digress and make things a little light here, you and I were talking about the hair, right? Because I said when I
Yeah,
look on your social media page, you have the funky hair sometimes, and then you have the serious dad look sometimes.
that's right.
Do you
That's
do
right.
you think that because you're so open and honest, probably you look
Mm-hmm.
young with your
Mm-hmm.
children, that makes you a lot more relatable to them as well?
Yeah, my I see so many kids who think their parents are not cool, and
Mhm.
and it starts, I think, with their mother. Really, like we've got tattoos, and my kids told me that the other day that you need a mohawk, so I went and got that. I said it was growing out, but like you look at their mom, and we were surfers. We charge waves.
Right.
We do things that are fun and exciting. We skateboard, and it's not we're trying to be. We're youthful people, and
Right.
and we there isn't this divide where like I'm not going to get on the trampoline and jump with my kids because I can't. I'm 52 years
Right.
old. One of the
Right.
things
Right.
I knew when I had children later in life was because my kids are 13 and 9, so I had them a little bit later. Um,
Mhm.
is that I didn't want to be a doddering old fool trying to get around and not be able to pick up my kid. And
Right.
so kept my I kept myself square. I made sure I
Yeah,
stayed in
take
shape.
care of your body. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah. I mean,
and
that's
have a
key.
youthful outlook.
Right, and then you wanna live too and do some things. You
Hmm.
don't wanna retire
Hmm.
and then, you work hard all your life and then now you're of a certain particular age and you're like, "Man, I'm hurting." You're gonna
No,
have a little you might need a little, oil here and there, but you don't want to have to
sure.
sit down and saturate yourself, you know?
No, 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 no. I don't want to dip. I don't want to dip.
Exactly, exactly. Only in the ocean.
That's right.
So now let me ask you this a little bit, digressing. Well, not really digressing, but kind of going back a little bit. I know your mother was a young mother when she had you. Do you? And I
Mhm.
read up on your information, and you said that you didn't feel the love. Do you think that had something to do with it because she was young and she was still finding herself?
Where did you see that? Tell me more
I
about that.
I thought I read on one of your pages where you said you didn't feel loved. Is that not correct? Did you always feel loved?
I always felt, I have to say, I always felt loved by her.
Okay.
I'm trying to think of what that would have, what page
I
that would have
think
been
it was
on.
on your the bio, the little write up. I thought on your matchmaker page. I thought that's where I saw
Yeah,
it.
no, I always felt loved by her. But like, look, she didn't have the luxury of time. I can say later in life, unfortunately, she has digressed and fallen off into alcoholism and didn't do her personal work. And so now I don't feel particularly loved and cared about by her, nor do my children, because of that, alcohol got her.
Right.
But I have to say that throughout my life, I always felt loved by my grandmother, who we lived in her house. My great grandmother was around for the time that she was around. My aunts were in my life. I always felt loved by those women. I think that upbringing geared me in a particular way. As a man moving through the world, I was raised by women, and when that happens, you see that. Oh yeah, yeah. You have a decidedly different keel. I think it helps me. Having been loved and cared for by those women the way that I was, to be a man wired that way, it helps me in the therapy office because I can work with men, but I can also work with women. Yeah.
That was my next question for you. Do you feel as if the approach you take with your clients come a lot from the things that you've experienced, or are you more just textbook when you take your approach to taking care of your clients?
No, so I take my textbooks and put them in my back pocket.
Okay.
And, so you're not going to get, so tell me how you feel about that.
Right.
Sit back and, I will bring in podcast interviews. I will often talk about do quotes and stuff like that. So I sound smart. And my book is full of research and all of that. But when you're sitting with me in a therapy session, it's like this, really. And there's a lot of humor. Because I feel like if you don't bring your humanity to the table as a therapist, they're not going to feel connected to. People come to your therapy office because they didn't get something. They didn't get the unconditional positive regard that they've been looking for. They didn't get from their families.
Right.
And so, connecting with them on an emotional level, on a spiritual level, to let them know that they are cared for at some level, they're actually loved. They're like, holy crap, so many clinicians are clinicians, and there's the divide.
Right.
I burned that opaque curtain a long time ago.
Right.
Roll up my sleeves and I'll say, are you what? What happened to you? Oh my God.
Right.
Feel validation. And I mean it. Yeah.
And that's why I take the approach I take with my show. When people come on, I'm like, look, we just be straight up and honest. I'm not trying to be, I like to have just honest conversations. I don't like to rehearse a lot before the show. Okay, this is what we're going to talk about. Okay, I'm going to ask you this question. Because when I get a response, I want your honest response to my question. Now, let me ask you this. Do you feel like with your clients, for instance, have you seen in what you do that people who have a lot of dysfunctional growing up seem to be dysfunctional adults, or do you find in different relationships, like as far as with their spouses, their mates, or their children, or do you have it more where people say, my life was just so jacked up when I was younger, I want to make sure my children do not experience the same thing? What do you see more?
You see that, what you just said, and often they will overcorrect. And so, my parents were overbearing and they were loud and they were angry. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give this powder puff existence where I'm going to show my kids, as we talked about earlier, that I'm not a person. We can't overcorrect in that way. But everybody drags their stuff forward. Everybody.
Right.
Whether you drag it forward in a not great way, in a toxic way, or whether you drag it forward with a lot of understanding that that's what went on. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that my kid has no friction in their life, which is doing them no favors whatsoever. Right. And so, and look, it's part of the reason I have a job, that people drag their stuff forward. Otherwise, you wouldn't need me.
Right.
And so we bring our wounding, and it sits behind us, so to speak, like it's behind me. like the little wounded kid in me that never
Oh,
felt like
right.
he was enough or didn't feel like he mattered or whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
she or he's got it too. And what we
Mm-hmm.
don't understand is we may be talking or arguing or fighting or whatever we're doing through these adult versions of ourselves, but the little kids are back there with the puppet strings playing.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right. In the
yeah,
subconscious, and we don't
yeah,
really even we don't even recognize it because that
nope.
person has been with us all our lives.
hmm
That little boy is still never or girl never healed.
Well, it comes out as I'm mad, I'm shut down, I'm
Right.
hurt, I'm any of those things. But when people come into my office, I'm like, I hear that, we can talk about that. I want to know what's underneath the anger because anger is a secondary response to something else,
It's
right? I want
something
to
that's
know,
happened,
yeah,
right?
I want to know why you feel so unsafe that you want to wall off, shut down, or become critical, right? Behind that inner defender part, that um, inner critic, there
Mhm.
is a part of you that's saying essentially, I wasn't loved, I wasn't safe, I wasn't enough, or I didn't matter.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
and so that's when it gets really interesting.
Right. Now, do you find a different, you know, these days and times, step families are huge.
Yeah.
There's very, there are families that have the mother and father, biological mother and father, but it doesn't happen, or it may start off that way and then dynamics may change. Do you find it difficult to treat step families, families that are like that, more difficult?
Step families, step parenting, I say it's some of the hardest work you could possibly do.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on the age that you get those kids too, right? Like if you get a fully formed teenager who's pretty sure you're the worst person in the world, that can be
Right.
really hard.
Right.
It's notorious for marriage and family therapists to say that like blending families is really really difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
it's made particularly difficult, I think, by former spouses who can't get along, who use the kids as pawns. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I do
Mm-hmm.
have one family in my practice who, you know, all the spouses, the four spouses get along. The dudes hang out sometimes. The women hang out. They get
Really?
everybody together for birthdays and Thanksgivings and Christmases. It's all inclusive.
Mhm,
This
mhm.
amazing, lovely family unit.
Right.
Um,
And
but
I
they're
had
the
some
one. They're the one.
dynamics. Oh, I was gonna say I had some of those dynamics because my family was a blended family as well,
hmm
and, so I had some of those dynamics. We didn't do a whole bunch of hanging out and stuff,
hmm
but we
hmm
did get along very well, and we learned how to communicate best, that was gonna work for the children.
That's all you
So
really need.
that's it. Yeah, so
hmm
that worked for us. Now, tell me about your techniques. I read that you do, let me find it here. You do an Eastern based mindfulness,
Yep. hmm
and you practice Western clinical models. I had to
Yep.
read that. I have some of your stuff in my head, but I really wanted to read that because I know
Yeah.
there are so many different approaches that
Yeah.
different therapists use.
Yeah.
What gravitated you to those particular techniques?
Well, a couple of things. First, my initial training was a 4-year training in New York, which was not a clinical training. It was essentially it was an ordination. It was a very spiritual practice, a 4-year training. There were clinical modalities within that, but I learned Eastern philosophy, Buddhist psychology in that training, that 4-year training. Then I went and got my marriage and family therapy license. Now, when because of my background and because I never saw couples who were really romantically connected and loving and all those
Mm.
things. And I'm saying this retrospectively. I didn't really
Right,
realize what I was doing at the time. But then I went to my
right.
internship, my clinical internship, and they said, "Who is your ideal client?" I said, "I want to work with couples."
Mhm,
And they said,
mhm.
"Great, because we don't like working with couples. You can have them all." And so
Uh-huh.
I started working with my couples, and I was using those Western clinical modalities that, like the cognitive behavioral, the Gottman methods, the nonviolent communication, the I statements, all of those things, and it was working famously. I was
Mm,
killing it
okay.
until my clients walked out my door, right?
Ah.
And then everything fell off the rails before they got to the elevator banks in my building. The things we had
Mhm.
learned in session were going off the rails, and they were coming back in. They were coming back in dejected, and I was feeling terrible. I thought I was helping these people, so
Right, and it's
I went to my mentors, I went to my teachers, I went to my peers, and all of whom said the same thing. They said, welcome to couples therapy. And I said, surely that can't be the answer. And so one very well-known marriage and family therapist said to me, well, if you don't like it, then figure something else for yourself. And so I did, and I wrote this book. And so I took Eastern mindfulness-based practice, right? The idea that we need to pay attention, not to what's going on outside of us at first, but what's going on inside of us.
Okay.
Why?
That's true.
It gets us out of our knee-jerk response.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
so rather than going, and I'm going to tell you why you suck, I stop and go, okay, what's going on for me?
Self-evaluate. Right.
Self-evaluate. And what's happening? I'm noticing that I'm getting elevated 4, 5, 6 on the Richter scale. As I take that mindful breath, I can bring that down. And so one of the first things they tell us in marriage and family therapy school is you have to de-escalate the couple. Okay, I can do that in office, but how the hell am I going to do that when they're in their house? And they're not playing by the rules, because couples don't play by the rules.
No, they don't.
They need something simple, something user friendly, and mindfulness was it. So I would teach them mindfulness, and they were doing it. And I would do it by getting them to do like 3-minute breathing spaces throughout the day, taking a mindful walk where they notice their body, they notice the birds, they notice what they were seeing, smelling, hearing, because you're focusing on yourself. And then I would have them do that before any conversation. And then, sorry, go ahead.
No. I was going to say, do you find that people have a difficult time doing that? Do you have to, because self-evaluation seems to be the most, like you can always pick out what someone else is doing wrong. But when it comes to yourself, do you find that's difficult for people to kind of grasp that concept?
The concept is pretty simple. The most difficult part about mindfulness is remembering to do it, to your point.
Gotcha.
Because the brain is wired for safety. And so I'm constantly looking like, okay, who's going to screw with me next? And what's going to happen to me? And so stopping and pushing pause and going, what am I smelling? What am I seeing? That practice, and like taking mindful showers where we don't just wash and get done, where we stop and go, oh, that's what the soap feels like. It sounds kind of silly if you think about. In my book, I talk about one couple called me Mr. Miyagi from The Karate Kid, because I had them doing these things that felt like wax on, wax off, painting a fence when we're trying to do couples work over here. And you have me taking mindful walks. Why?
Right.
Because I want to create that I want to build that muscle of introspection, of being present for oneself, not because we're selfish, but because if I'm paying attention to what's going on for me, I'm going to be less reactive with you. And from that mindful place,
gotcha.
I can ask a couple of really important questions, like, what part of me is here? Right? Because we all have, and this is going into the clinical mode, the Western mode, which we have parts. All of us have aspects of self. There's a part of you that shows up to work. There's a part of you that shows up as a mom. There's an aspect of you that shows up to your parents. And there's a part of you that shows up when you feel threatened. Right? And how's she?
Okay.
What's she like?
Right.
Let's give her a name. Let's give your part a name. What does she do? How does she protect herself?
Me, myself?
Yeah, you.
Give her a name? Oh my God.
Well, how does she protect herself? Are you a fighter? Are you a fleer? Are you a freezer? How do you do it?
For me, I fuss.
I'm a
if
fighter.
That's what you mean. I'm a screamer.
You're a fighder. You're a warrior. You're a warrior princess. You have a warrior princess in there. What's her name? Mine's Mitch. My wife calls him Mitch.
I don't have a name.
You got to come up with a name at some point.
I got to come up with a name?
You got to come up with a name.
Okay, I'm going to come up with a name before the end of the show now.
You do, because she protects the kids in you in a particular way. And so when you feel threatened, when you don't feel loved, when you don't feel safe, when you don't feel like you're enough, when you feel like you don't matter to the person you're supposed to matter to, she comes up. We'll call her Xena for a minute.
Now, why can't she just be Carolyn?
She could be, well, it's fun to give her a funny name.
That's kind of like blah, right?
Well, because it's like we want to make Carolyn the wise self, the part of you that has equanimity, has compassion, empathy, and understanding. The actual,
gotcha. You want to separate it, those.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we can say when, Xena's here, or when my wife walks up to me and she'll put her hand on my shoulder, she'll go, it's feeling a little Mitchy in the house today. Are you okay? Yeah. Right. And I'll go, I don't know what you're talking about. And I'm like, pretty much. Yeah.
And do you think taking that approach helps people recognize, okay, there's another person here that I'm not liking, I'm not feeling.
Yep.
when normally they don't get it. They just think that they're just being
This is
Carol.
just me. Yeah. And
Right.
so when you say, oh, a part of me is really angry right now, then you get the
Mhm.
totality of your experience, because there's also a part of me that's really hurt or really scared. And if
Gotcha.
I can get people talking about that, now we're cooking with
Mhm.
gas, because there's
Right.
nothing to be gained from that. Warrior part of you sees
Mhm.
everyone and everything through the
Mhm.
lens of defense. She's there to create. She's ready. She's there to create space,
Mhm.
not closeness. That's an important piece to understand, that Xena part of you, that Mitch part of me, is there to create distance, because distance is safer. And so Mitch sees everyone, including my wife, as a reason to protect himself.
Gotcha.
And so if I'm in that compartment of self, and this is, Carl Jung talked about it in his work, and it's throughout the annals of psychology that we have these parts, these aspects of ourselves. It's important to look at them, like tools. Or, if you're in that compartment of self and you're looking at your partner, it's like trying to send an email from your Instagram account.
Gotcha.
Okay. You don't have, Instagram does not have that capability.
Right. Doesn't have that. Right.
This part does not have that capability of connecting with my wife.
You have to come back to the other. Right. Now, one of my viewers say they love that strategy. They think that will help a lot. And I agree, because I never thought about that. But when I am nice and happy, I am in a different mindset than I am when I'm angry. So it is good to give that person a name, because, okay, here she is. She's showing up.
Like, and what happens when you name it? What happens when you name it?
You recognize it, right?
Not just name it by giving it a name like Mitch or Xena, but go, I see you. I know what you're here to do. And so something will happen. And my wife says nothing happens because I'm perfect. And something will happen, and Mitch will come up, right? Or I'll feel it, and he'll like literally feels like he puts his lips to my ears and he goes, now you get to say this. And I'm like, I'm not saying that, right? And I get separation from him, because I know that when I let that part of me take over, it never goes well. Not really. I create distance, not closeness.
Right. I understand that. Yeah. Do you find that approach is good with conflict resolutions?
It's essential.
Because it's now essential. You realize that. Yeah.
No, Carolyn, I'll tell you right now, couples come to me daily and they say, we have communication problems. We can't talk about it. And I'm like, you don't. And they're like, no, I've been to the house. We do. And I'm like, you don't. They're like, well, how do you know? And I said, because you just communicated the fact that you have communication problems just fine. You have a command of the English language. What you have is a parts of self problem. The aspect of you that's showing up to the difficult conversations with your partner is a part of you that cannot have that conversation. It's showing up to Instagram looking to send an email. It's taking out the Swiss Army knife and knowing you have to cut a rope and you're pulling out the corkscrew. It doesn't work. You've got to find the right part.
Do you think that is something, just to kind of digress just a little, do you think that is when, I won't say just men or women, cheat outside their relationship? Do you think that's a different part of them that's being fulfilled, like a different angle?
It's a great question.
Yeah. Do you think that's a whole nother? Yeah. Let me know.
Yeah, it is. And so I handle infidelity much differently than perhaps a lot of therapists do. I use it it's not unlike drinking, taking drugs. It's not unlike gambling, right? All of those things we'll go, well, we'll get that person help. But if they go outside the marriage and they cheat, we go, well, that guy, that woman is an awful human. They're awful. I saw a meme today. Said just that. If you're doing that, then you're an awful, terrible human being. I'm like, no, you're not. You're a wounded human being. You're a wounded human being who made some not great decisions, hurt a lot of people probably because you're wounded too. And the more interesting conversation is, what part of you allowed you to do that? What were you attempting to salve in you by doing that? Look, drugs, alcohol, it's all a bypass. I don't want to feel how I currently feel. So I'm going to take some drugs, I'm going to drink, or I'm going to gamble, or I'm going to go have some illicit sex, because that all feels in the moment and to that part of us really good.
Right.
Only afterwards in retrospect, we're like, oh, that was a terrible idea.
Crappy. Yeah.
I'm hungover. Right. I did a terrible thing. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Does the other person kick in after that? Like,
yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And then,
Kicks
so,
in.
but when you talk about infidelity, like that's for me, I'm like, okay, so some part of you didn't feel like you mattered. Some part of you didn't feel loved. Some part of you didn't feel like you were enough. And you going out and getting, and having that with that other person made you feel to a degree in that moment, like you were enough, like you were loved, like you did matter. And so when we ferret out that experience, we start having a different conversation, and couples can actually heal from those terrible wounds.
Okay. Now, since we're talking about that a little bit, let's talk about your book, The Practice of Love. Why do you call it the practice? Why is it practice?
That's a great question. That's exactly, I named it that because it starts the conversation, and that is, what do you mean? Why love and practice together? They seem like misnomers. Like that's not something we put together.
Right.
Because love should be a practice. Love should be something that you want to do so well that you could list it on your resume next to special skills like karate and breakdance fighting. You know, you want to be able to like have that skill set that your partner feels really loved because you're really good at loving that person really, really well. I also said love is a practice because I called it the practice of love because we just sort of set it on autopilot. We think it's something that we should know how to do, like buying insurance or selling a house. We should just know how to do that. But I bet you when you went to sell that house for the first time, you didn't know how to do that. You're like, wait, what are we doing? This seems huge. Yeah. Well, love and romance and connection to other people, that falls in that same category. And just like buying a house, just like getting insurance, there was no class in high school. There was no curriculum in college that taught us. Yeah, nothing. No.
Nothing.
But you're supposed to know how to do this thing. And we don't. And the statistics prove that we don't. The fact that I have a job proves that we don't. And so I wanted to make it, and I think also there's this other connotation to it, which is if we call it a practice, we put it in the bin of things I want to do well. Like if I want to hit a backhand in tennis, or if I want to learn, to surf a wave, I practice that. I spend time and I give it attention. We don't do that.
And is that why you think a lot of relationships, when we think about stepping outside of the relationships and all that kind of, because they're not practicing it. We just kind of get used to the same thing. It's almost like my routine. I go get coffee. I like sugar, or I don't like sugar. I like it all black. Straight, no chaser. With my drink. So you think it's the same thing? It's like we don't practice it enough. We just kind of get in this mundane way of approach.
Yep. Yeah. And so speaking broadly, that can happen. That can be a symptomatic piece of not practicing well. I also say when we get with somebody, like, look, in the beginning of a relationship, it's all puppy dogs and rainbows by and large. Right.
Right.
And that person hung the moon and the stars, and everything that comes out of their mouth is prose and all of that. But something shifts, something changes. And it's sooner or later they become the same old cracker.
Right.
And this comes from Eddie Murphy's thing from years and years ago. I'm dating myself now. And so they become that, not because they're necessarily boring, but because of the third practice in my book called the narrative. And that stipulates that the stories we tell ourselves about any one thing matter, right? I have thoughts that become feelings. Those feelings become more thoughts. Those thoughts become more feelings. Pretty soon I've created some beliefs about who you are and who you're not. Some of that's true and some of it's not. Some of it's fair. A lot of it's not. And so I dug into narrative therapy when I found this. And these two guys in the early 80s who founded narrative therapy said that we prune the narrative, which means that we select information that supports our narrative and we get rid of information that doesn't. And that's important, right? Like we edit. And so we're editing about our partners. Like that's boring. That ain't good naked. We start buying into that. Like, that was, we're living with this person. Suddenly it's not prose. Suddenly it's some bullshit.
Yeah. Right.
And that's not the moon and the stars. Why don't you, pick up your end? And so we start to proliferate a narrative that says, the one I usually use is that my sweetheart who left the milk out again for the second time this week because they work so hard and they're so tired? Or is it the no account SOB who only thinks about themselves?
You're right.
Yeah.
It depends on who's there that day.
Choose your own adventure, right?
Exactly.
And I'm not saying that, look, you can't look at a garden full of weeds and go, there are no weeds in my garden. There are no weeds in my garden. Expect there to be no weeds in their garden. There's got to be someone over there pulling the weeds. That's your partner.
Right,
They've got to be doing things to necessitate a good narrative. And so,
yeah. So making that lemonade out of lemon thing, it's just kind of like
there's some truth to that. Like
And
you put a little sugar in there.
Just a little, pick your sugar. Some people like this, some people like white sugar, some people like cane. You just gotta do
whatever you like. Just make it a little sweet sometimes.
Like. So and that's why I think and this is really, really digressing, but I like your approach. So that's the only reason I'm going to mention this. It's totally outside of what we were talking about.
Let's do it.
I think we have been talking. My husband and I have been talking because a lot in the news coming up lately has been a lot of violence, around the world, and every time I live in Atlanta, I'm from Florida, and every time you turn around, it's a young teenager getting shot or something of that nature, right? And we were talking about guns and that kind of thing. And do you think that same approach that you use applies to the young? Because it seems like it's the generational thing. It seems like that generation that's so quick to be angry and react. Do you think a lot of that is that person that they have not identified with, that they can't say, okay, let me step back from what's going on and rethink this? The same approach you use to, because I like the approach, recognizing someone else, another person is there, a part of you has not been healed. Do you think that's part of why people react so quickly when they're angry in all situations, or are they all different?
Anger is a secondary response to something else, more than likely, right? Right. And when you have, when you look at the micro, which is on the ground, that kid right there, and from that family, from that house. Right. And then you look at the macro, which is, how we treat in our culture, how we treat women as opposed to men, how we treat people of color as opposed to people, white people. Right. You have favored children here. Right. And you have children at large who feel, from our government, I think, like, I'm not loved, I'm not safe, I don't matter, I'm not enough.
And I got to defend.
I got to defend myself. No one gives a shit about me. I'm going to take care of myself. Right. And you see that on the macro level, and you see it at the micro level, and you see that at the macro level, because this is going to sound a little, hippy dippy, but I think whether we like it or not, we are all a family. And unfortunately, we act like a really toxic, dysfunctional family, and we aren't taking care of our kids on the small level and on the large level, and we're seeing it. We
are. It's kind of, and that's the reason I brought it up. I know it was kind of off topic, but
no, it's on topic. I think it's on topic, and you're the only interviewer that's actually drawn the line that I've been drawing it in my head and thinking, like, look, when I first moved to the South, I'm a white guy from the North coming to the South, talking about how we can use mindfulness to bridge the racial gap, and maybe we can get a little bit closer in our community.
Right.
That's a tough pulpit to stand on. I gotta be
absolutely. Did you have on your armor when you were doing that?
I went and did talks. I did. I went and stood in front of people and tried to talk about it.
I don't know. It just because I've been hearing it, so because I'm actually going to do a show about it. So I like the approach when you said, I never, as old as I am, I'm not saying, but I never thought about there's a different Carolyn that that shows up when I get angry, or when I defend, or if it's some, if you always think it's just me.
Nope.
But there are layers,
parts of you in there.
There are layers to that make up Carolyn that a lot of us don't identify with. And if we learn how to identify with those, you done gave me a session today, and you didn't.
That's what I'm here for. That's what I do.
You know what I mean? So, So it just it's true. If you can apply that to different areas and aspects of your life, and that's why I kind of and teaching people how to do it is important because
Well,
we don't
it's in my
recognize
book, like, how to do it is and I'll tell you this, when I talk about the corporate speaking
right,
or the success, like talking to people about because we have relationships to people, but we also have a big relationship to what we do or what we want to create in the world. And so asking yourself who shows up to the thing you want to create in your world. Look, if the inner fraud shows up to your podcast, it's gonna suck, right? You're gonna stammer, you're gonna stutter, you're not gonna know, right? But if the part of you that is the professional, the part of you that wants to make a difference in the world, and the part of you that wants to do the thing that you're doing shows up, that part of you, she stands up a little taller, her shoulders are back a little bit further. She has access to information that the part of you that would fall apart in this moment does not. Now, I almost failed my licensing exam because of that, right? Because I was so scared of the test. I was in the frightened little kid. I had to find my inner clinician, and I passed it on the first try.
Oh,
yeah.
Way to go.
It was parts. It was the part
of it.
But
I can tell that you do I can tell just from speaking to you that this comes from a deeper place. It's not just I got a job. This is what I went to college for.
Nope.
Like I went to college for accounting, and I do taxes, but it really, you know what I'm saying?
It's a job. It's not your work.
I hate them. But when I started doing the podcast and different things, it just, I always felt I was introverted because I'm not real social.
Okay.
But
that doesn't mean you're introverted.
It doesn't? Oh,
not
okay.
Necessarily.
Well, I don't write. Well, I mean, I don't really talk to people a whole lot. So I felt like I was just more,
But you look at what you're doing right now.
I know. That's what I'm saying.
I think you like to talk to people that are willing to go to depth. You don't like to skim off the surface and do small talk.
No, I do not, because I really feel like I have ADD during those times because my mind is way over there.
Yeah,
exactly. Like, okay, oh, sorry. What did you say?
What was your name again?
Exactly. I'm all right. So, but I enjoy what I do, and I enjoy meeting new people and getting different aspects and approaches because I tell you, you have definitely given me a different approach. So listen.
Yeah.
Leave some good information for my audience. If you were going to tell them something that could help them just before they buy your book, because you guys need to buy his book, and we're going to give you some more information on that, where you can find it and all of that. But what information would you tell them when it comes to dealing with conflicts and just themselves? What would you tell them?
So this is the one that I don't put on the front of the website because no one would come. Right? Oh, okay. Yeah. It's personal responsibility. Right? Like you find all of your strength. You find all of your strength in personal responsibility. No one wants to do that because we see it as blame, shame. I was right. You were wrong. I'm happy to argue for the victim position in this. You hurt me way more than I hurt you.
Right.
And so when I tell people about personal responsibility and saying like, this is the part of this that I can take off the table. This is the part that I can own without any caveats or without any, but I wouldn't have done that if no, this is where I sucked. This is where this is what I want to do better. This is your power center. People will say to me, no, I'm going to become too permissive. I'm going to give up ground. I'm like, nope, you're going to take the higher ground. The higher ground is owning your stuff. It's what Frost said when he wrote that poem about the two roads that diverged in the wood that day. And I took the road less traveled and it's made all the difference. This is the road less traveled. No one wants to do it. Everyone says it's blame. It's not. It is truly freedom. And it makes the space between us a softer one. It makes the space between us a safer one. Right. Now, we're so worried the other person might not show up in that same space and they may blame us, and they may. That's not your responsibility. And so understanding that, you begin to find your wise self, your most authentic version of yourself. And that's truly what my book is about, less than even about couples. It's about showing up in the best version of yourself. And so many people who have read it have said, that book's about showing up as an individual better in your relationship, less than it's about being in a couple. Yeah. Okay. So personal responsibility.
Okay, great. I think that's awesome. Now, where can my audience find your book if they're interested? Where is it?
Everywhere. You can't get away from it. It's like a bad haircut. It's on you.
Because I failed to mention that you had interviewed with Rolling Stones and New York
Rolling
Times.
Stone, NPR, New
What
York
is
Times,
NPR? I swear I
National
don't know.
Public Radio.
Oh, I looked it up. I did
Yeah.
look that up, but I didn't want to get that acronym. I was like, let me make sure. So okay,
Yeah. No, it's a little. It can be a little boring.
Yeah, I did see that though.
Yeah, but it's pretty pretty prestigious news outlet. They're
Okay.
known. They're actually a really good news outlet. But anyway,
Okay.
you can find it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, anywhere where books are sold.
Okay.
They can also reach me at Lair Torrent, my name, Lair Torrent Holistic Therapist on Instagram, and I'm happy to chat, talk.
Hold on, let me see. Look, I'm going to try to share my screen because I did put something together. So y'all, look, let me try. Hold on.
Mm-hmm. Let's do it.
It better.
Come on.
Oh my gosh, hold on. I actually can you see it? Oh, you can't see it.
I can't see it. No.
Hold on a minute. Hold on, let me try to share it because I have it up and I there we go. Let me share it. Okay, can you guys see it?
Oh, right on there it is.
Can you see it? Hey, go ahead and give it to us. Where can they find you?
They can find me at lairtorrentholistictherapist.com, and there's that TikTok handle as well, but also lairtorrent.com. And I also have a podcast of my own. We only have a couple of episodes out. It's called Not Your Mama's Therapy. And it's an irreverent approach to really serious topics. I talk a lot about these topics, but I want to put a warning on there. We got an explicit rating because we do have some potty mouth talk on there and some funny stuff, because I think being funny and having a good time with some of this, and let's not make it so stodgy and boring.
This is my AM show.
Mm-hmm.
I got a really good show. Like I had a really good show coming up here. It's gonna be interesting. Mm-hmm.
All right.
But yeah. Well, so anyway, The Practice of Love by Lair Torrent. He is awesome. You got to go out, get his book. He said it's everywhere. Google his name, and or you can contact me through social media, and I'll send you his way.
It's also an audiobook too on Audible.
Okay, yeah, because some people don't like to take time to read, but yeah.
Listen.
Hey, we can hear it. We can still mentally take it in. Right?
Same thing.
There you go.
Right. It's like me being in your house, me being in your car. Just coming for a visit.
Are you actually doing a
Carolyn, I had to audition for the part to play myself.
Really?
I had to audition for that.
I wondered how that worked.
Yeah, because some people are really boring and they wanted to make sure that you could deliver.
You can kind of keep the attention. Yeah. Wow, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, learn something new every day. Well, look, I totally appreciate you being on the show. You were awesome.
I had a great time talking to you.
You were awesome. I thank
you.
And we will definitely be in touch. All right.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.